All right, good evening, everybody. Tonight we have our first speaker of the class, which is Dr. Matt Hepburn. In lieu of doing long introductions, I've asked him to actually tell you all about himself, about who he is, what walk of life he comes from, right? So I'm gonna put him on the spot and make him tell you about the fact that he is a physician by training, and a little bit about what he's done to his career, but then to focus really on the story of the last 20 months. So it is now August 30th, 2021, and turn over to Matt to talk to you about what he has done throughout the course of the pandemic. So Matt, thanks for being here.
Absolutely, yeah. And so goal is to talk briefly about myself and tell you a little bit about some lessons from Operation Warp Speed, where I am, we call it the Countermeasures Acceleration Group now, and I'm vaccine development lead. Been in this position since, so the Rose Garden ceremony, which launched Operation Warp Speed, was May 15th. Wasn't there, but showed up at the HHS building soon after as the DoD representative to vaccine development. And Peter Marks from FDA stepped aside about a week later, and I've been doing this ever since. So I want to tell you sort of briefly how I got here. And just to say, it's been, a privilege of a lifetime to kind of work vaccine development. This is, if you will, kind of trained my entire career for this moment. A lot of friends and family have said sort of this is my Super Bowl. And so, but I don't mean to be excited about it. It's also been pretty much the worst year of my life. And I think everybody would agree, sort of the terrible impact that this continues to have. So it is it's a privilege to serve and have the experiences I've had, but it's also one of the most discouraging. I mean, I woke up this morning and I was just, really, really, really discouraged and frustrated. And, those types of emotions still sort of color kind of my last 18 months too. So with that in mind, I will kind of highlight some of the things though that we have accomplished, that we've learned, and that I think are going to substantially impact how we get ready for the next pandemic. And in my current role, I'm focused day to day on vaccine development. I'll soon be moving to a different role where it'll be less day-to-day current pandemic response and much more what do we need to do, especially from a research and development standpoint, to prepare the next pandemic. And so this role I was well prepared for. My next role I've kind of also been well prepared for, and I'll explain from a background. So I kind of want to start with my mom and dad. So my mom was a nurse. My dad was a nuclear engineer, actually. And essentially his dad died. His dad was a World War I veteran and died when he was very young. And so for him to be able to go to college, he had to have a Navy ROTC scholarship, which he attended Villanova University, and then joined kind of after the Second World War when our Navy became a nuclear Navy. He was one of the nuclear engineers that led that, and he stayed as a reservist, was active duty for 6 or 7 years, stayed as a reservist. So, I was just the same way. From when I grew up, it was about, serve your country, serve other people. And that kind of ethic really kind of characterized, frankly, my whole career. And so I did an Army ROTC scholarship because I got seasick really easily, which is not actually true. It was actually because the Army told me I could go straight to medical school. The Navy told me I couldn't. So my undergrad experience, I was a biomedical engineer, but it was characterized by not only training in biomedical engineering, but the leadership training that comes with ROTC. So went to med school, and then did internal medicine residency in Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, got a year to teach as a chief of residence, which was one of my favorite years of my life, because teaching is awesome, Rebecca, so you can get me to teach more. Pivotal, two things really changed my trajectory. The first was when I was taking care of patients as an internal medicine resident. I said, I can treat a patient with hypertension and diabetes, and there isn't very much I can do for them. And, this was unfortunate, it was a long time ago. I didn't graduate a few years ago, but it was a long time ago. And that really hasn't changed. We control these diseases. We don't cure them. And I said, if we're really going to make an impact on on people's health, I don't want to just sit there and kind of treat around the edges. We need to make a huge difference. And I felt like research was the way to do that, to have a fundamental, massive impact. And in the Army, I had the privilege because as you know, we have a solemn obligation to take care of a worldwide deployed force, and that since throughout time and the Second World War and up until this present day, these people we've asked them to be in harm's way, and harm's way can also be exposed to endemic infectious diseases such as malaria and tuberculosis and all those types of things, and now Ebola and COVID are added to that list. And so I went into infectious diseases because of global health, and I wanted to save the world and have that type of global impact. And then for me, my 9/11 was the anthrax letters, and the anthrax letters were a time where we realized that even a small group of people could do bad things and shut down a city. And we thought anthrax was the tip of the iceberg in terms of how biological weapons were going to be used against us in the next, few decades. And what it did is we frequently hear these calls for a Manhattan Project. And that time it was the Manhattan Project for Biodefense. And what we were going to do is we were going to make vaccines against all the bad things that bad people could make, and basically take that threat off the table by making vaccines. And so that changed my life. And I was sent to where the Army does that type of vaccine research against biodefense pathogens, which is up in Fort Detrick, Maryland. And that trajectory led me to do clinical research and vaccine work, and to do a lot of work overseas where we worked with weapons scientists from the former Soviet Union and said, how about you work on public health stuff like influenza and infectious diseases diagnostics and those types of things. And then got deployed to Iraq, and then got a chance to, I was in Iraq during the H1N1 pandemic, and running chief medical officer of a hospital, and a lot of our patients were actually detainees. So I got a chance to try to manage a contagious respiratory pandemic in a detainee facility where everybody's right next to each other. And so all of those lessons I brought to a policy role post-pandemic, and where we said, post H1N1, where we said, well, we can never let this happen again. What do we need to do to prepare for it? And we had all these great ideas in 2010, 11, and 12. And some of those things I'm very glad we did. And a lot of those things we didn't really do because then we hit sequestration and budget cuts and everything else, and really didn't have a chance to resource what was needed to get ready for this next pandemic. And so some things I'm really glad we did and glad we had, and others, we look back now and say, gosh, I wish we would have been much better at X, Y, or Z. From the White House National Security Council staff, I had a good friend of mine was at DARPA and said, you're doing a lot of policy talk and blah, blah, blah. You talk about the problem. What are you actually going to do about it? So why don't you come to DARPA? You can manage our pandemic preparedness portfolio, which meant investing in biotech, small and large, partner with pharmaceutical companies, but all of those investments saying, how do we get ready for the next pandemic? And a lot of our investments were, how do we make vaccines and antibodies really, really fast? And so I retired from the military after 6 years at DARPA, had a chance to stay in the Department of Defense and continue to run our rapid response antibodies and vaccine programs. And then COVID hit. We started to activate vaccines and antibodies and diagnostics and started to do that work. And then they gave us a call and said, for Operation Warp Speed, we want to bring the best of both worlds, of Health and Human Services and Department of Defense together for this national crisis. And so that's why I'm sitting in the HHS building now, about 18 months later. Is that good enough Rebecca, I hope she was going to make me talk. I hope that
No,
was.
I think that's good, but it'd be great so I appreciate that you're willing to tell us the kind of the backstory of how you got there, but now tell us what you did at OWS.
Sure. So certainly privilege of a lifetime, because we had I guess all of the elements of a successful program, and we had a really, really successful program. I mean, I think it's not a political statement, or it's not a I'm great statement. I've made so many failures in my career, including the things I do. I make mistakes on a daily basis in the hundreds. But this really, really worked. I mean, no one imagined that we would have this many doses of highly effective vaccines at this point. And if you take us back to last May, I don't know if any of you are like sports fans or not, but you sort of know when the opposite team says you can't do it and says all this bad stuff about you and your players and your coach and everything else, and the press all says you can't do it, and you put it up on the bulletin board and use that as your motivation. For us, it was just about every vaccine expert, including and the CEOs of a lot of the major pharmaceutical companies, and everybody who said, no, it can't be done, said it can't be done. It's mission impossible. It'll never happen. And actually, to the extent that it is irresponsible for us to even claim that we would have a vaccine available, and this time in May and June, that we would have vaccine available by the end of the year, and that we would have sort of sufficient doses to cover the American population in the first half of next year. So it did work. We had a lot of things that didn't work, and so we've learned a lot from that. I think in question and answer, we're going to get a chance to dig into those. But I do want to make three kind of quick, kind of government-y policy type points, and then we'll do question and answer. So the first is that government can work, and I think there is a lot of you guys have asked some of your very insightful list of 29 questions was about vaccine hesitancy and trust, and we're going to get into all of that. But I think one of the reasons that people are very hesitant about vaccines is they don't trust anything the government tells them, and they don't trust the institutions that we assume you should trust. We assume you should trust the healthcare system. They don't. We assume you should trust the public health system. You should trust the CDC. They don't. You should trust the Food and Drug Administration. They don't. You should trust the federal government. They don't. And a lot of, the reasons for that are very deep and complex. You can explore that in this course. But one of the reasons they don't trust the government, not only is that the government lies or whatever else it is they just think the government's inefficient and can't get anything done, because the track record that they've seen in the press is that the government can't get anything done, including this pandemic response. So what I really like about what we were able to accomplish here is we showed that the United States government with an interagency task force can be extraordinarily successful. And that's not done on its own. That was done in partnership with public health in terms of distribution and pharmacies and the companies that develop these vaccines and everything else. But make no mistake, there isn't vaccines. You're not getting vaccines that have significantly blunted the impact of this pandemic without the federal government, without the resources, and without the leadership. Now, we did things that were very different than usual government. We had a very flat organization that didn't have bureaucracy. We had investment and willingness to put resources on the line to do things in parallel. We ask about how did Warp Speed go so fast? One of the ways we went fast is we took financial risk, not efficacy or safety risk, but financial risk, saying that we're going to have manufacturing commitments very early in the process. And if we end up making millions of doses that never get used, that's absolutely worth it, because that would save us days and weeks and months in the product development cycle. So there was a lot of things that we did that were very different than any other government program, but we were the government. To be a bit more specific, we had world-class scientific expertise every step of the way. And that came from Health and Human Services, that came from the NIH, and that came, I mean, that we were able to make the right decisions and to hold these companies accountable because we could go toe to toe with them in terms of the scientific merit. The NIH, as good example, were the critical partners in the early development of the Moderna vaccine. So engaging with Moderna was a relationship where we had worked with them for years from when I was at DARPA as well. So we were able to have, they couldn't, I know, pardon my language, but they couldn't bullshit us because we knew their technology, we knew the science as well as they did. But we also brought in the Department of Defense. And one of the really interesting things, so I was talking to the Deputy Director of the NIH last Thursday. We were reminiscing a little bit about Operation Warp Speed. And he said, I really had no idea that the Department of Defense could do all the things that Department of Defense did for Operation Warp Speed. And that surprised me because I've sort of lived this space as a medical professional, but in the Department of Defense. What the Department of Defense brought to it was operational planning, logistics, supply chain, all of the aspects that it takes to execute an effective operation, contingency planning, that we do for a living. And we do that to essentially make sure that there are enough supplies and logistics to have thousands of troops on the Korean Peninsula, which we've maintained for decades now, or any of the other operations that the military normally conducts, a humanitarian assistance operation to Haiti. All of that occurs because of a system in the military to develop leaders and personnel that essentially know how to plan and execute an operation, and they know how to be extraordinarily flexible so that I don't care what you ask them to do, they're going to do that by the system that they create in terms of operational planning and execution. So we had over 100 DoD personnel. There were probably 3 of us that had any background in vaccines before the operation started. Within a month, they knew as much about vaccine supply chain as anybody else in the world. And we had people on the ground in the plants every day, planning for contingencies, planning for how to execute this mission. And, what often happens in product development is that there's the complexity of all the things you have to do because essentially everything has to go right. If you forget one thing, single-use bioreactors become in short supply, and then therefore you can't make your vaccine. Well, you lost 3 months. And what the industry usually does is they just say, well, we lost 3 months, we'll figure it out. We'll just charge you on the back end because we're making a lot of profit. In this case, we couldn't lose 3 months with any of the little details of supply chain or logistics or transport or distribution. And so every contingency was taken care of and planned for. And that's how we were able to go that fast. And so the reason I bring it up is that, one of the really interesting policy questions is the role of the Department of Defense in pandemic response. And on the one side, I think that there is something, very special about the military leadership and the people that serve our country and how they've been trained for operational planning. That can be used for a wide variety of benefit in terms of crisis response or otherwise throughout our government. But that's not their job. And so the more that you have the military involved in vaccine response, as we are right now sitting in this room, the less that they can do other aspects of national security. So the decision, and so what we're doing is the Department of Defense is pulling out, and Health and Human Services is going to run most of the 3rd dose booster campaign as we're going to move into. And I think that's the right decision. I think, it's been an interagency training effort, frankly, where the Health and Human Services has learned operational planning and supply chain and is now creating that own capability so they can do that themselves. But what happens next time? Should the Department of Defense come in and use all of that expertise, or should we figure out another group or way to do that so you don't need the Department of Defense to come to the rescue in terms of this type of emergency response? I feel like they should, because I think we should put pandemics as high priority in terms of threat to our national security or threat to our civilization as any of the other threats that we prioritize. And we should resource it accordingly. And we should use the Department of Defense where it can bring to bear help so that we can respond to a pandemic even more effectively next time. But that's worthy of debate. And so, but I'm telling you, in this case, it worked. The final point that I'll make, and then we'll open it up for questions, is back to more of the global health impact here. So, and sort of what we can do for the next pandemic. So there's a lot that we can and should do. But I'm fundamentally, profoundly excited by the prospect of saying that if we can make a vaccine as fast as we did for COVID, and not one, but really, multiple vaccines for COVID as fast as we did, if we can achieve now 4 billion doses of vaccine administered worldwide, all comers, with a goal of ideally, 8 billion doses by the end of this year and more doses sort of going forward. I think that is far, far more. As I heard, I think the annual production of vaccine, of all vaccines, all comers for everything, is about 4 billion doses a year. So this year we're going to double it. Next year we're going to more than double it. It begs the question of why do we have vaccine preventable diseases? So if we can make that much vaccine and then figure out how to distribute that much vaccine as part of the COVID pandemic response. And again, the world is going to continue to get very good at this, because I think for the most part, we're going to need probably 3 doses of vaccine before you achieve long-term protection. So we have a lot more to make. We have a lot more to distribute. We have a lot more to execute to put this pandemic to rest. If we can make that much and we can distribute that much, then why do we have hepatitis B? Why do we have yellow fever? Why do we have human papillomavirus? Why do we have malaria? And so the challenge that our global health, I'll put to the global health community, and I want our United States government to lead this challenge, of course, with appropriate international organizations and partnership and all the caveats that go with it. But to lead that challenge, to say, we should be making 30 billion doses of vaccines a year. We should vaccinate the globe against all these vaccine preventable diseases. And the better that we get at doing that, then for the next COVID, the next pandemic flu, the next Ebola, of course we can make billions of doses or millions of doses in a very short period of time, and we can distribute it and we can stop the outbreak in its tracks, because we've gotten so good at vaccinating the world against all these other vaccine preventable diseases. So that's where I think we should do for the next pandemic. But first we got to get through this one. Let's do questions.
Wait, before jumping into questions. So I guess the quick follow-up question is, so what exactly do the next 6 months look like for you? Like, is this what you're focusing on, the thinking about the building up that vaccine manufacturing capacity, or?
Yes. So I'm still here now. So the next few days for me and our government team are, we're going to need a third dose. And we could talk about the data if you're interested in that, but I'm just telling you, we're going to need a third dose. And my philosophy has been, if we're going to need a third dose, let's do that to achieve ideally significant protection of our most vulnerable populations right now, instead of waiting, and hopefully get some impact on symptomatic infection and transmission against Delta as well. And if the answer is, well, the world needs the third dose, then we need to vaccinate the world. And Rebecca and I can talk to you a lot about what I think the United States should be doing in terms of that global vaccination campaign. The bad news is we haven't gotten off to a great start in terms of United States contributions. I think we've done some good things, but I think we can do a lot more. If the good news of the bad news of the terrible news of Delta is that this thing's not over. And so I'm hopefully painting a picture for you that, we're going to need 20 billion doses of vaccine to get through the next year or so. So we've really got to take seriously how we can make billions of doses. And frankly, billions of doses of a highly effective vaccine is probably what we're going to need against Delta and the subsequent variants. Now, the good news there is that what we're doing the data and the research to kind of show that it's probably okay to get a different vaccine the third time around than you got for your first 2 doses. And that if that vaccine you get third time around is a vaccine that produces a strong and durable immune response, then it's less important what you got the first 2 times around, and it's more important what you get that third time around. And so I think that opens up the opportunity for us to truly think about how we scale highly effective vaccines. So that's where my head's at for these next couple of days. Then likely working policy role in terms of what do we do for the next pandemic. And and we can get into it in the question and answer a little bit, but I think the one part that we clearly have to do is we clearly have to my head's going to be mostly in kind of the therapeutics and vaccine space. So I'll start there. But one of the things we really have to do is we were fast this time. We have to be a lot faster. I will, in answer one of your questions, I was going to make a statement. I was going to challenge a myth. And the myth is that you can't rapidly develop a product and still maintain the highest quality standards of safety, efficacy, and quality in manufacturing. It's not true. It's just not true. And so the reason it takes 10 years to develop a vaccine is because these processes are sequential, and it takes the FDA 9 months to review a BLA application, And so, we just saw the Pfizer vaccine approved in 3-ish months. And you know what the real reason is why it got approved so, in 3 months instead of 9? They put more people on it. So, I mean, the highest quality of regulatory standards and clinical trials and data, a massive amount of data was accumulated. But all of these processes you can go very, very quickly and still maintain the highest quality standards. To be able to accomplish that, though, you need really good technology like mRNA, for which you can engineer. You need to be able to scale your production very, very quickly. And you need to have the clinical trials in place, again, quickly, and you need to have the regulatory components. So what we're doing for the next pandemic is we're looking at each of those and saying, how do we go really, really fast in each of those areas and still maintain the highest quality standards? And the way we do that is we do things differently. We adopt new approaches, and those new approaches have to be de-risked. And what de-risked means is you kind of have to do it before anybody's going to accept it. So with RNA vaccines, we would be in great trouble right now if we hadn't de-risked RNA vaccines through preclinical development, clinical trials, US government investment by BARDA in their Zika vaccine, which de-risked their manufacturing. All of that had to set the stage for the sprint of the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines that got us to where we are now. So that's what we have to do. We have to exercise, we have to make vaccines, and we have to make vaccines with new technology, with different quality standards, with making clinical trials as virtual as possible so that we can enroll more patients, we can track them more closely, we can cut the costs by an order of magnitude. And we have to get to a next generation regulatory science and review so that the reviews can occur in weeks instead of months. So, but the cool part, what I just told you, is that so we have to try all these new technologies and we have to de-risk them. And how are you going to de-risk them? You got to do it, right? You got to execute, you got to run programs. So why not do that for malaria? Why not do that for universal flu? So at least what I'm proposing is that it's going to cost us a ton of money. Okay. A drop in the bucket versus, compared to the economic cost of even a mild version of a pandemic. We learned that now it's trillions of costs. So we're talking about, billions, but why not exercise our ability to make next generation vaccines in record time against malaria? And oh, by the way, maybe distribute them throughout sub-Saharan Africa and see if we can eliminate that as part of the added benefit of pandemic preparation. So, and you can make the same, you can take that analogy and you can say, this is how we can exercise next generation data science so we have a better healthcare system. So we do, take care of people in their homes, or we can say how we scale diagnostics. It's the same principles as we go after the routine stuff, but go after it aggressively, scale with new technology and de-risk it.
Well, I'm just going to say I am extraordinarily grateful for everything that you have done, and thankful for your time here tonight.